Good morning. A quorum being present, the Subcommittee on the National Security and Foreign Affairs hearing entitled GPS, Can We Avoid a Gap in Service, will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that only the Chairman and Ranking Member of the Subcommittee be allowed to make opening statements, and without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that formal written testimony from Dr. Scott Pace of the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, as well as formal written testimony from Dr. Bradford Parkinson, the Chief Architect of GPS and the original GPS Program Manager, be accepted for the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the hearing record be kept open for 5 business days so that all members of the subcommittee will be allowed to submit a written statement for the record, and without objection, that's so ordered as well. Well, again, good morning, and today the Subcommittee on National Security and Foreign Affairs will continue its oversight of the defense procurement with a hearing that focuses on a technology that most Americans find very familiar, GPS, or Global Positioning System. The GPS was invented by the United States for the purpose of assisting the military in combat operations, but is now expanded to all manner of industries, from personal transportation assistance to commercial aircraft navigation to emergency medical response. GPS is made technologically possible by a group of satellites known as Constellation, positioned in such a manner that when communicating with receivers on the ground, we can pinpoint a location anywhere in the globe. As an acquisition program, GPS service falls within the clear responsibility of the Department of Defense, most notably the Air Force. However, it affects multitudes of users far beyond the military. Civilian government agencies rely on it, as do commercial industries, personal users, and the international community. Indeed, it is as much a part of the world's infrastructure as it is a critical system for national defense. Unfortunately, that reliance is at risk of being misplaced. This morning's hearing was called in light of this subcommittee's requested General Government Accountability Report entitled Global Positioning System, Significant Challenges in Sustaining and Upgrading Widely Used Capabilities. In this report, GAO documents weaknesses in the procurement of upgrades for GPS satellites, as well as the negative effect that these failings have had on current and future efforts. The current block upgrade of GPS 2F, has overrun its original estimated cost of $729 million by an additional $870 million. In addition, the block will be completed 3 years late. This is not a new problem for the Department of Defense procurement. We have another situation where the contractor, given total system responsibility for the development, could not execute the job either on time or on budget. According to the GAO, no major satellite program undertaken in the past decade has met its scheduled goals. It would seem that GPS is no exception. What was billed as an effort to streamline the acquisition process instead resulted in a lack of oversight and control by the Air Force and Department of Defense. This doesn't bode well for the next GPS block upgrade, GPS 3A, which just began in May of last year under an extremely aggressive acquisition schedule. The Air Force has engaged a different company and plans greater oversight for this block. The GPS 3A contract was intended to be reminiscent of the days before acquisition reform, when the government tracked contracts closely rather than letting the companies run free. There's a novel idea. That sounds good, however, like the predecessor GPS block and so many other Department of Defense procurements, the contract is a cost-plus type contract, meaning the government will pick up the tab no matter how expensive it ends up becoming. This system not only hinders the accountability on behalf of the contractor to the government, but also hinders the accountability of the government to the taxpayer. I look forward to hearing from our Air Force and Department of Defense witnesses today about how the failings of the past will be avoided. Of greater concern, even than cost overruns and delay, is the real possibility of a gap in GPS service. The Department of Defense has a formal commitment to users to provide 95% availability of service, which has been achieved through a minimum of 24 satellites in the GPS constellation. With the aging of satellites in the GPS constellation, there are serious questions about whether that availability can be maintained. I direct your attention to the monitors on either side of the room. The graphics on the screen depict the probability of maintaining this 24 satellite commitment. The first graphic shows the probability of a 24 satellite constellation falling to roughly 80% in the 2011-2012 timeframe. The second graphic depicts a scenario where, if the GPS 3 block encounters even just a conservative 2-year delay, the probability of maintaining a full service constellation drops precipitously starting in October 2013, possibly going as low as 10% by 2018. In light of recent history, I'm troubled if we are wholly relying on the hope that the GPS acquisition schedule holds as it stands today. This brings us to a second and equally important set of issues. How is the Department of Defense preparing for this potential occurrence, and what impact may there be to users if a gap does occur? The reality is that from an acquisition perspective, we are nearing the 11th hour. The President's fiscal 2010 budget terminates funding for the primary GPS backup system, LORAN. That puts a lot of pressure on DoD to ensure that GPS meets all user needs, a precarious position to be in if a gap is looming. What are the Department of Defense and the Air Force doing to prepare users for what could be a shock to the system? Department of Defense and users need a robust dialogue in order to ensure that user requirements are met and funded, users are prepared for any possible reduction in service, and the GPS industry can be involved in discussions about potential mitigation strategies. GPS is a critical asset in our economy and to our security. It's unfortunate that we may find ourselves in a position of weakness because we've not yet learned to get our procurement house in order. My hope is that today's hearing will provide the opportunity for all parties to come to the table, to air and address concerns, and to bring public attention to this important matter. Mr. Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we all know, GPS is an important part of important asset to the military and for civilian purposes. The Chairman explained very well the problems that we've had, cost overruns, significant delays with the next version of GPS, in terms of the satellite systems. Now, we know that the next generation will come, and that is slated to be on time at this point. We want to make sure that the problems that we've had recently don't plague the new system coming up. There are obviously problems with the procurement system that we have at DoD, and look forward to the testimony and seeing what we can do better in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Flake. The subcommittee will now receive testimony for the first panel before us today. Ms. Christina Chaplin currently serves as the Director for Acquisition and Sourcing Management at the United States Government Accountability Office, where she has responsibility for GAO assessments of military and civilian space acquisitions. Ms. Chaplin has also led a variety of Department of Defense-wide contracting-related and best practice evaluations for the GAO. Ms. Chaplin holds a BA from Boston University and an MA from Columbia University. Major General William N. McCaslin is the Director of Space Acquisition in the Office of the Undersecretary of the Air Force, where he directs development and purchasing on space and missile programs to Air Force major commands, product centers, and laboratories dealing with acquisition programs. He has served in a wide variety of space research, acquisition, and operation roles within the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office. General McCaslin holds a BS from the United States Air Force Academy and a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Dr. Steve Hybricks currently serves as the Principal Director for C3 Space and Spectrum in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he has oversight responsibility for most of the nation's military space, command and control, communications, navigation warfare, meteorology, oceanography, and spectrum allocation activities. Would you like to take on some more responsibilities? Previously, he was assigned to the Air Force Research Laboratory, where he was responsible for selecting and managing many of the nation's highest priority space experiments, as well as directing the Air Force's research portfolio of spacecraft power, structures, and control technologies. Dr. Hybricks holds a PhD from Stanford University. I want to thank all of you for making yourselves available today and sharing your substantial expertise. It's the policy of the subcommittee to swear in witnesses before they testify, so I ask you to please stand and raise your right hands. If there are any persons who will be submitting testimony along with you, please ask them to rise and raise their right hands as well. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? I do. The record will please reflect that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. All of your written testimonies will be submitted on the record, so everything that you have written down and submitted to us will be there. We allocate about 5 minutes for people to make an opening comment. You'll see the amber light come on when there's about a minute left, and the red light comes on, and the floor opens, and you drop through if you go to the 5 minutes. All right? But generally, we try to hold off on that drastic thing. We'll let you go a little bit over because we value your testimony. We want to hear what you have to say, but we do want to have a chance to have some questions and answers and get to the second panel as well. So, Ms. Chaplin, if you'd be kind enough to start.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me today to discuss our work on the Global Positioning System. We performed this review for your committee in light of the criticality of GPS to the military, the economy, and many, many individual users, as well as challenges that have been facing the acquisition programs. We've issued a comprehensive report which is available on the GAO website. The report covers our findings on the acquisition of the satellites, the ground control equipment, the military user equipment, as well as the larger coordination of GPS. Today, I just want to highlight what we believe are the most important takeaways of our work. In short, all three acquisition programs have had major issues in development, which have had major consequences for GPS users. The GPS 2F satellite acquisition program, for example, as you mentioned, was delayed 3 years due to an array of issues, including requirements changes, a loss of expertise in building the GPS satellites on the contractor side, lax program oversight, and technical problems that the program is still dealing with. This, coupled with the aging of satellites in orbit, the decrease in the number of satellites that were planned for the 2F program, and schedule risks going forward with the 3A program, present the risk of a capability gap. Military user equipment acquisitions have also been delayed considerably due to funding shifts and diffuse attention. This has also had severe consequences for users. DoD purposely reopened already manufactured satellites 10 years ago to install capability that would lessen the effect of jamming of GPS for military users. But today, because of delays in the production of military user equipment, we may not see that capability be taken advantage of for another 10 years. Lastly, because of developmental delays, ground control equipment for GPS cannot presently support some capabilities of the newer satellites in orbit. With regard to the potential gap in satellite capability, our analysis, as you said, shows that if both the 2F and 3A programs are executed on schedule, there's still just an 80 to 90% probability that the GPS constellation will stay above 24 satellites. With a 2-year delay, the probability drops to as low as 10%. A couple notes about our analysis. One, we largely replicated the methodology employed by the Aerospace Corporation and relied on their reliability parameters. We matched the results of our analysis of what could happen without the delay with the results of Aerospace Corporation's. Two, there are measures available for the Air Force to deal with the gap, such as turning off a secondary payload for periods of time. But this produces other trade-offs that need to be considered. Moreover, such measures may not be able to compensate if there are long delays in schedule. Three, our analysis is based on the commitment of the Air Force to maintain a 24 satellite constellation, and many users, civilian and military, have expressed a desire for 30 or more satellites, particularly to assure coverage in mountainous and urban areas. Four, the Air Force insists that it's on a good track to meet the schedule for the 3A program, and we agree that it is and commend the Air Force for taking a number of actions to make the program more executable. However, it's important to remember the program is still in its early phases. The Air Force anticipates shaving off 3 years of what was done for the 2F program, and it's still not clear whether the 2F program has overcome its schedule problems. Also, the program is not merely replicating 2F, it is aiming to build GPS on a much larger satellite bus, increase the power of the military signal by a factor of 10, and add a new signal, all of which could create technical and design difficulties for the contractor. Lastly, as you said, no major space program in recent years has been delivered on time. Some programs that have also tried to adopt better practices for development have still run into schedule delays. As we pointed out in other work, some space programs are facing delays as long as 7 years. So in our view, there are reasons to be concerned about the schedule for GPS 3A. Moreover, as mentioned before, even without a delay, there's still up to a 20% chance the constellation will fall below 24. Clearly, that alone warrants attention from senior leaders and everyone involved with GPS, which our recommendations are focused on and which the DoD concurred with. Before I conclude, I would like to point out that we also focused on the larger coordination of GPS among civil agencies, the international community, and others. This is a very broad area which was frankly impossible to audit comprehensively in the time that we had. But it was clear through our discussions and analysis of documents that there is confusion on how civilian agencies should get their needs met by GPS, and frustration on DoD's part, which is focused on keeping the program executable. I look forward to the discussion of today's second panel because it will also shed light on the degree that users are aware of risks facing the program and whether they're positioned to manage those risks. That concludes my statement, and I look forward to talking more about the report.
Thank you very much. General.
Good morning, Chairman Tierney, Ranking Member Flake.
I ask you to please just pull that microphone a bit closer to you and make sure that it's on.
Yes, sir. There we go. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm Major General Neil McCaslin, the Air Force's Director for Space Acquisition of the Pentagon, and it's a distinct privilege to address you on the Air Force's management and execution of the GPS program. I've provided a written statement for the record, so I'll limit my opening remarks. GPS provides accurate location and time information in all weather, day and night, worldwide. It's vital to military and civil activities, including mapping, aerial refueling, weapons, search and rescue operations, banking, geodetic survey, and agriculture. The Air Force, as the developer, operator, and steward for GPS, is committed to maintaining GPS as the gold standard for positioning, navigation, and timing information. As your committee has noticed, and this hearing is evidence, assured GPS capability is critical to the success for many missions, from humanitarian relief to military operations. The Air Force is committed to continuity of this critical service. To that end, sustainment of the constellation is our #1 priority. In addition, we continue to make improvements to the constellation, including new civil signals, more jam-resistant military codes, new receivers, increasing accuracy and integrity of the service. The foundation for success, both technically and schedule-wise, lies in our mission assurance process. Mission assurance is a disciplined application of management, system engineering, and quality principles over the entire life cycle to ensure mission needs are satisfied. It's a culture we've worked hard to rebuild at the Space and Missile Systems Product Center that permeates the GPS team and is ingrained throughout all its functional disciplines. Simultaneously, senior leadership across the Air Force, Department of Defense, and Transportation have committed to GPS program success. This shared goal enhances capability synchronization, budget advocacy and stability, and provides the support we need to deliver and execute our plan. The Air Force, sir, is committed to maintaining GPS as the premier provider of positioning, navigation, and timing services. We have high confidence plan to sustain and modernize this critical national capability. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm ready to answer your questions, sir.
Doctor?
Good morning, Chairman Tierney, Mr. Flake, distinguished members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the Subcommittee on National Security and Foreign Affairs.
Can I ask you as well, I'm sorry, if you just pull that somewhat closer to you, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Is that better? I have also provided a written statement for the record, and General McCaslin has gone through much of DoD's position, so I'll limit my opening remarks. My name is Steve Hybricks. I'm here today representing Mr. Grimes, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Networks and Information Integration. As stated before, I'm the Principal Director for Communications, Command and Control, Space, and Spectrum. GPS does play a major combat support role today in both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. The system plays an ever-increasing role in a wide range of DoD missions, including counterinsurgency operations, force and infrastructure protection, collection of intelligence, and strike of time-critical targets. I appreciate the chance to again highlight the importance of GPS to a wider audience and the importance of keeping funding for GPS across both defense and civil lines stable. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today. We greatly appreciate your support, and I look forward to continued collaboration.
Thank you for what I can only term as minimalist testimony. It was both of you and General McFarland. I don't want to be overly critical on that, General McFarland, but I read your testimony and then heard what you had to say, and some would term it as happy talk, you know, in the context of what we're doing here. And I understand that the Air Force is excited about its mission or whatever, but we have some serious difficulties here in issues that I think have to be confronted on that. Let me start. Dr. Hybricks, at least your written testimony did address the two questions that the General Government Accountability Office posed. And so, Ms. Chaplin, let me ask you, has Department of Defense, as far as GAO is concerned, responded as you would anticipate and as you would have hoped with respect to the two issues and recommendations that you presented?
The Department of Defense concurred with both recommendations, and while
But
we
have
were
they done anything about it?
the report just went out, so I don't see what they've done yet. In describing their concurrence, they pretty much said the leadership structure that's in place for GPS serves them well. And what we're concerned about is that there's a lot of people that have a hand in the GPS program, and it's not always clear who's really in charge of the program. That gets to be particularly troublesome when it comes to the user equipment. Each military service develops its own user equipment that goes on every kind of weapon system you can think of, and that's where we see a huge delay getting that user equipment onto weapon systems. So the military services have their control over that issue. Acquisition, technology, and logistics have control and oversight over the acquisition side of GPS. The NII office is designated as the lead office for GPS, and there's also many, many other players involved with GPS. So again, in our view, what we were hoping to see was just strengthened kind of leadership focus on GPS because of the potential capability gaps, because of the risk in acquisition, and because of the criticality of GPS to everybody in the nation.
Dr. Hybrick, are you that person? Are you the one that draws it all together and makes sure that they're coordinating and getting things done in a timely fashion?
That is my role, yes, up at the OSD level. We have put a single service, the Air Force, in charge of all segments of the GPS program. This is unlike the way that we handled many of our other space programs where multiple services are involved. So from that perspective, you do have a single entity that's in charge of acquisition and operation of the system. My office at the OSD level has been given by the Deputy Secretary of Defense singular responsibility for this program. That said, we have to manage the program within the department's processes. It's one of many programs and has to get traded off against all the other various department needs. I'd like to address the issue of the user equipment delay if I could. I think that about 4 or 5 years ago, the department and particularly the Air Force did recognize that there was a risk of a gap if we did not act. And
They did or did not recognize?
Did recognize that. And it is for that reason that within the resources available to the program that we prioritized the space segment followed by the ground segment upgrades higher than the user equipment. That's one reason the user equipment is lagging, is because we wanted to prioritize any mitigation of a gap in service.
So you took from Peter to pay Paul. Basically, you took money out of the end user aspect to deal with the satellite situation.
Yeah, I'd argue that it's probably less an issue of money than it is just an issue of people that understand this technology, that can do this kind of work. There's only so many resources that we can apply to the various things within space that we're trying to execute. And within this program and the elements of our nation that understand this technology, we prioritize continuity of service. And now, if you look at where we're focused today, it's largely on the user equipment because we feel we have a pretty solid plan going forward for the continuity of service issue.
We're going to get to that in a second. But Ms. Chaplin, does that give you any comfort?
I know you're familiar with GAO's concerns about the larger acquisition process, and one of the things we harp on is investment strategies and prioritizing across the department. In my view, if you're going to put a priority on GPS, you need to have a priority on the user equipment and look beyond the space portfolio for those resources if it's so important to the military.
Thank you. And I'm curious, how does the Air Force really manage all of the other departments and tell them, what needs to be done when? General, do you have any difficulty with that? I mean, what I hear from the GAO report is that everybody's sort of getting their aspect of it ready when it's ready and putting it on whenever they might, and there's no seemingly control over getting them all coordinated and synchronized. What are you doing about that?
Yes, sir. Let me elaborate a little bit on that. First of all, the Air Force's role in user equipment is to develop product lines that are available for the other services and any user to integrate them. And just as something to show, I have here engineering models of the next generation M-code compatible user equipment that we're going to be fielding to operate with GPS-3 satellites. Now, these are very early engineering models, but it's from 2 different vendors, and it's just some illustration that we're making technical progress today. To your broader question about management, it's the Air Force's role to develop, productize, and make available for production gear like this. And these are chipsets and subassemblies that have all the functions of GPS on them, and to make them available for the defense industry and the other services as a whole. And this is because the Air Force really shouldn't be in a position of building the end item that is fielded into Army mechanized equipment or into ships or into other people's airplanes.
No, but I suspected somebody, if not the Air Force, then Dr. Heibrick's office, should be in the business of making sure they get it done in time.
Yes, sir.
And to certain standards.
Yes, sir. You bet. You bet. And the standard setting inside the department, the Office of Secretary of Defense sets policy oversight. The Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs sets technical standards for functional integration across this enterprise. And we've been through this in several waves. If you may recall, the original fielding of GPS into the military took these tools of synchronization. And so there's been 2 generations of modernization of GPS user equipment since the original fielding. All of them have followed a pattern that we've learned from. And it's a balance for a program manager, say the manager of an Army mechanized equipment line. That program manager has got their own set of schedule and cost constraints and services to integrate into his weapons system. So our job in the Air Force is to create an opportunity for that program manager to have good choices, economical equipment, technical standards so that we can support them. The timing and the synchronization of this is an issue that we look to and support OSD in their oversight role. We in the Air Force are accountable for the integration into Air Force weapon systems, but we also decentralize that so that the program manager of those particular weapon systems are the first line of accountability of the integration of a new service like GPS or satellite communication or any other service into their particular program. This is an effort of some complexity and its synchronization, but it's a balance between the specialized nature of a service like GPS and the mission function of a particular weapon system that has to integrate services like this.
Mr. Flake.
Thank you. Appreciate the testimony. Major General McCaslin, I never really heard what you thought of the GAO report. Did you agree with the findings? Do you concede that there's a problem and an issue here, or is everything just hunky-dory?
Well, as the department's response, Ranking Member Flake indicated, we generally agree with it. We offered some clarification and comments. If I may, and take the lead from your question, let me step through a couple of reactions to the report. To start with this risk of a gap, as the GAO indicated, they followed the methodology and the technical assumptions that we use in the Air Force to monitor this. Those assumptions were provided to them some time ago, about a year ago, and in that time, some things have changed. These lifetime assumptions are a bit like actuarial tables with people, except we don't have human history to base them on. We've got a much shorter history in a population. The specific population we base it on is the flying population of GPS 2R satellites. And in this year, the 2R satellites have continued to live. So the models that we base their future forecast have grown a little bit. So just in the year, we can look to this same gap, and if we were to recalculate it, it would be only about half the depth that it is today. The second comment that I would make, and the GAO did acknowledge this in their report, is that this model is based on a predicted launch rate, and it's based on the full use of all the power on the satellite for all the payloads. So those are two choices that the operators, and General James, who will be on panel 2, could speak to. The operator will have choices to make. They'll have choices to make about how fast they actually launch the satellites, and they'll have choices to make about the way they spend the power on the satellites. So when we take all of this in the whole, We on the supply end have choices to make every budget year with the degree to which we program the rate of the build rate and the replenishment of the pipeline. The operator has choices to make for how fast they consume the pipeline and how fast they consume the on-orbit resources, the degree to which they consume the available electrical power. With all of that, we're confident that we've got several degrees of margin in preventing a gap like has been depicted in the GAO's report. So the GAO's report is accurate insofar as those technical assumptions are what happens. We think that there are many choices that will allow us the way to not face those circumstances over the next few years, sir.
All right. Ms. Chaplin, one of the ways to extend the life of these satellites is obviously to cut secondary payloads or cut power to those, I guess, to extend the life. One of those secondary assignments or purposes of these satellites is a nuclear detonation detection system. Is that one of the secondary payloads that can be jettisoned, if you will, or put aside? And if it is, yes, the life of the satellite is extended, but do we have a gap then in some of the secondary purposes, the nuclear detonation detection system?
Well, our point is you can turn off those secondary sources and conserve a lot of power, but that needs to be a discussion that needs to take place precisely for what you're saying, that to look at what other gaps you might be facing in other capabilities. Also, with regard to predicted launch rates, it's important to note that last year we had a lot of issues in launch manifest, a lot of backups, so even what you assume can be a good launch rate may not turn out to be the case. With regard to the assumptions of data being based over a year ago, I would like to note that we held up our report a little bit longer so that we could receive data from DoD that came to us in March 2009, updated all our analyses, and that's what you see reflected in our report.
So you stick to the percentages.
Yeah, I'm very confident what we have is about as recent as we could possibly get. I would also comment that these same gap scenarios have appeared in other documents, including described but not in a chart form in the report that DoD delivered to Congress on the GPS system in December 2008. So the concern about gaps is a long-term one because basically a lot of satellites that are in orbit are aging. And there's only, you do have measures you can take to conserve power and stretch out the constellation. There have been times before where people have been worried about gaps, and the Air Force has managed them quite successfully. But here we are again, and our point is this is a high risk, and we just need a lot of attention and resources on it.
Doctor, do you have anything to add to that, particularly with regard to the nuclear detonation detection system? Is that one of the choices to not have that function as a way to extend the satellite?
Sure. That is one of the choices. I would point out that the NDS system, the new det detection system, does not require 24 packages on orbit. It's a much lower number. The reason we launch one on every GPS is just to have a standard satellite configuration, so we're not worried about which orbit we're going into. So there's a fair amount of leeway there to turn off payload capability without impacting performance of the system. I also wanted to add that we're using the term gap, and that sounds very black or white. Compared to pretty much all of our space capabilities, the GPS constellation degrades, whether it's from 30 to 29 or 24 to 23 or 5 to 4, more gracefully just because of the numbers of satellites. This is kind of like the numbers of sweaters in my teenage daughter's closet, right? To go from 24 to 23 sweaters is not like she doesn't have any more sweaters. It may seem terrible to her. So what we're really talking about is a slight chance, and our analysis, which is independent of the Air Force's, is more in line with General McCaslin's analysis, that we're more in the 10 to 20% chance So a small chance of going for a short period of time from 24 to 23 satellites. It's not as if GPS will turn off. I'd point out the original GPS spec was only 21 satellites. The decision to move to 24 in the late 90s was a somewhat arbitrary, I don't want to call it an arbitrary number, but it was sort of an estimate of what we could afford versus the cost benefit of building more satellites. We decided we were going to shoot for about 24 satellites. So we shouldn't be sitting here thinking that all the GPS receivers are going to stop working. What you're going to get is a slight degradation in performance over small portions of the world for small periods of time, and relative to today, and it primarily impacting users in canyons and places like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We didn't realize you were under such stress having a teenage daughter, but we'll try to be easy on you now. Mr. Foster.
Yeah. If you could continue on that point, the degradation that you see then has to do with the resolution you get, or the acquisition time, or what? How does it show up when you get fewer and fewer satellites?
You will see it. You would see it. I mean, you would see it today today we're flying 30 or 31. If you lose one today, which is well within our tolerance, you will see the same impact, a slight degradation in accuracy, and possibly for certain users that are in deep canyons, et cetera, you'll have less opportunity to get 4 satellites in view, a slightly smaller opportunity to get 4 satellites in view, and therefore be able to compute a solution. So for certain very specialized users, a slight increase in the acquisition time potentially to get the 4 satellites in view, and maybe a slight change in the accuracy also over certain spots of the globe for short periods of time.
And I understand there's also a European competitor system, Galileo, I think. And do you know what the timescale for that is and what its capabilities are nominally from both a commercial and a military point of view?
There is a European satellite system. It is currently a paper system, but there is money allocated to go off and build it. I believe that they are still targeting 2013 or 2014 timeframe to be launching satellites. Depending on which analysis you believe, that may be very optimistic or it may be accurate.
Okay, and the intention is to make a system where you just have reprogrammable digital receivers that you can listen to either the European or the U.S. system. Will a typical commercial system allow at least be able to work off of either system?
We have negotiated an agreement with the European Union so that our signals will be compatible, so that when their satellites launch, it will be possible to build receivers that can accept signals from both systems simultaneously. Potentially, if we're flying 24 satellites and they're flying 24 satellites, a user would have access to 48 satellites at that point for the civil signal. We don't have any agreements at the moment for relative to they don't have a military signal, they have a national security signal, but there's potential for that there too.
Okay, the next question is for General McClassen. Are the 2 modules that you have here the only modules that will be the standard solution for all Earth-borne equipment?
Those are prototypes of what the Air Force intends to make available as standard engines for the GPS military user equipment. There's a commercial industry that has shown us that they will also develop GPS user equipment for commercial applications, and some have capitalized military applications as well. So we will build this product line, make it available with the tech documentation. My own sense is that our American industry will also develop their own product lines and make those available to suppliers as well.
Okay, now do you have, but so from a military point of view, you intend to have one product line and everyone's just going to use it? Or are you just going to say, here's a reference design and then all the different services are going to go and come up with modified versions of that?
Well, we intend to make, that's the core of the GPS receiver that you've got in your hands, the radio, the cryptography.
Well, I take it this ball grid array that's sort of double sticky taped on here is a mechanical prototype here?
Yes, sir. Those are engineering prototypes, and those are pretty early models. I just wanted to illustrate that it's moved beyond paper.
No, now it's into plastic. Okay. Do you have working silicon for all of the pieces of the actual chips that'll be here?
I'm sorry, sir.
Do you have working silicon? Do you have integrated circuits that do the job?
For the sub-assemblies that we do there, for the correlators, the security modules, we do. We haven't got a working prototype. The working prototypes are due at the end of in the end of the FY10 program.
Okay. And is there anything in the spaceborne equipment that is being held up because of uncertainties in the earthbound equipment? Or
No,
do you
sir,
have,
not
you
at
have
all.
a well-defined technical interface
No, sir,
there?
not at all.
And they're independent design
we have
problems?
well, they are dependent, of course, but we've published the signal structure specifications, and as you know, along the lines of Dr. Heibrick's last comment, we work to define that because the signal structure, its definition.
So those have been frozen. Those have been frozen already?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there's no uncertainty that's crosses over. Okay, my light's red.
Mr. Duncan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Our briefing paper, our memorandum says the current modernization program was projected to cost $729 million with a completion date of 2006. The Air Force has failed to meet cost and scheduling goals for this project. GAO estimates that this project is $870 million over budget and 3 years past due. And I remember reading last year a GAO report that said the Pentagon had a total of $295 billion in cost overruns on just its 72 largest weapon systems. And nobody got upset about that. Apparently you're not supposed to criticize the military in any way today. And I think in part it's because the figures are so high that nobody can really comprehend it. People did get upset about the $328,000 photo mission to New York City. Maybe they can understand that a little bit better. But now, according to our memorandum, $1.6 billion has been spent on this program, and yet it's still not completed, and it's $870 million over budget. General McCaslin, is anybody upset about that, or are we just going to gleefully go on and just so that if Chairman Tierney holds a hearing on this a year or two from now, people are just going to come in and tell us it's even more over budget and further behind schedule? I mean, somebody ought to be upset about this.
Well, sir, I won't dispute being upset. I am too, because as a supplier, that's resources that I don't have available to meet my operational customers' needs. So I'm inclined to resonate with you. As the GAO report pointed out, the particular portion of the GPS program that those figures were associated with is the GPS 2F satellite program, the current production program. And the GAO noted that a number of circumstances conspired to aggravate the business performance of that program. One of which was the consolidation of the defense industry. The GPS 2F program was awarded to Rockwell Collins. As the industry consolidated, Rockwell was purchased, its factory operations moved up to, it integrated with the former Hughes Space and Com factory in El Segundo under Boeing ownership. The second dimension that the GAO also noted in her report, was that the government also chose to evolve and modify this program at the same time in response to user demands. We had military and civil requirements that we were trying to meet, additional services for civilian second civil signal, and the beginnings of the evolution of the M-code modernization and the power growth for the military. The third thing that the GAO also noticed in the 2F program was that we awarded the 2F program under a experiment of acquisition streamlining that we now look back and say was not successful. And so the combination of those have added up to cost and schedule growth that the GAO has rightly reflected on. The GAO also noted that for every one of those, we've taken steps to ensure that those circumstances aren't being repeated on the GPS Block 3 program. We believe that the industry consolidation is stable, that the supplier base is healthy. They have a business volume that tells us that we can count on doing business with the same people that we've signed the contract with. Now, admittedly, that's subject to circumstances beyond Defense's control, but it appears to be a broadly accepted assumption that the industry is stable. We've put into practice kind of a back-to-basics approach for government oversight, the use of military standards, and we think that that's already showing signs of success. Thirdly, we deliberately laid out...
Let me say this. I see my time's about to run out. You know, it seems to me that federal bureaucrats, and particularly the Pentagon, can rationalize or justify or excuse almost anything. It seems to me that it ought to be awfully difficult to make excuses for an $870 million cost overrun. But I suppose that since it's money that's not coming out of anybody's pocket over there at the Pentagon, people don't really care that much. And I just think it's terrible. I mean, I can't describe words adequate to express my feelings about this, because I have a feeling that if we come in and have this same hearing a year or 2 years from now, we're going to hear that there's even more cost overruns. And if this was happening in the private sector, either people would be fired or a company would go out of business. I think it's shameful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan and I are going to start our own party on this issue, because I couldn't agree more. And we're going to have a series of hearings about procurement in the Department of Defense right on throughout this session, because it's outrageous, and he's absolutely right. I don't think, General, that circumstances conspire. You know, that's not what happens. People mess up, all right? And I think the Department of Defense, in a big way, has messed up, starting with the idea of whatever they called reform being an absolute joke. I mean, their reform was essentially to take out oversight and management, to take out scheduling and procurement people, to fork over all their responsibilities to things that were inherently government, and turning it over to the private industry as if they were going to be trusted to do everything with no self-interest at all. I don't know who was responsible for that decision. I'd like to know whether anybody's head rolled for it. Do you know of anybody that lost their job for changing the system of what apparently we have written testimony on the record from the original program manager for the first GPS system that went on time and within budget, and then some genius decided to change that process and to put it what they call reform and take out all of the protections and safeguards for the taxpayers' money and for the end user's ability. So who made that decision, General or Doctor, and whose head rolled for it?
Are you asking who made the decision to reopen the 2F satellite?
Who decided between the first GPS and the next iteration that they were going to fix something that wasn't broken and drive us to the point where we're now behind schedule and over 100% overrun of cost? Who went from the system where you had people on oversight, you had government people at the industry's places watching over this, where you had schedulers who knew what they were doing and how to account for variations, where you had program managers watching it every day, to a system where you just gave it to the contractor and have a nice day? I mean, who's responsible for that?
Mr. Chairman, the time frame of these decisions were in the late 90s, and I didn't prepare for a historical accounting.
Well, I'm sorry that you didn't, but clearly this hearing was about what went wrong and what's going right, so maybe you should have. Yeah. But the idea is, who would it be your level, the person that was in your seat that would make that decision, or Doctor, would it be the person that was in your seat at that time that would be responsible?
The decision to open up the 2F satellite and add the new civil and military capabilities was made in the late 90s at the White House level. Okay.
It was made at the White House level to actually change the whole system of how it was done. Instead of following the program aspects of the previous one to go to another thing, they made that at the White House as opposed to the Department of Defense?
The decision to modernize the GPS system and
I'm not talking about that, Doctor. You know what I'm talking about. I know the idea to modernize it. Who made the decision of how they were going to manage it? That's what I want to know. And I doubt very much that that was made at the White House. That was made somewhere in the Department of Defense. And what the question is to you, who in the Department of Defense, at what level and what particular seat, decided to go from a program that was operating perfectly well to a system that gave it all over to the contractor without any government oversight or any essential government oversight? Who made that decision?
If you're asking who made the decision to change how we did space acquisition writ large, because we did change space acquisition and how we did it, not just in this program, but across all the space programs at that time, I would have to take that question for the record.
Would you do that, please, and let us know? Because essentially,
Certainly.
we've run into this problem. The Government Accountability Office tells us over and over again, these are the issues. The relaxed oversight, relaxed quality inspections. We found it with the Coast Guard program, Blue Water. I mean, they gave all the contractors to the same contractor, the one to design, the one to build, the one to oversee, and then when all of that went wrong, they gave them the same contract to the same company to fix it. I mean, we're running into this every time we turn around, and I think part of what's incumbent upon us is to make sure it doesn't continue on. Now, General, you tell us that you've essentially gone back to basics here, and I hope that's so. Government Accountability Office reports that that's what you tell them. There's going to be more oversight of this. You're going to have more quality inspectors on site.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The engagement of support offices like the Defense Contract Management Agency, field offices, the way we engage with the contractors, all of that is frankly, it isn't so much that we forgot the recipe, it's that we consciously chose to try it in an unsuccessful manner, and we're going back to the methods that Dr. Parkinson used when he was a colonel. They've served us well.
I hope you haven't forgotten the recipe. I mean, again, I think if somebody had something that wasn't broken and they decided to fix it, I'd like to find out who it was and what was motivating it. I doubt that it was sheer stupidity, but that might be the case. But if something else is motivating, we better find out what happened, investigate it, and see where it leads us on that. The other problem I think that we're going to have, it's replete throughout all of these different procurement programs, is people qualified to do the scheduling and people qualified to do the program managing. Are you having difficulty finding enough people that are qualified to take care of your systems, including this particular system?
Mr. Chairman, that is an issue that does concern the Air Force. In fact, the Secretary of the Air Force released a plan called the Acquisition Improvement Plan, tied to his strategic goal of capturing acquisition excellence. He released that plan just this week. One of those elements is precisely aimed at growing and qualifying and training the acquisition workforce. So I share your concern. The human capital is the heart and soul of good oversight, and we're committed to the health of that workforce. That's the career force that I grew up in. I have a personal sense of commitment to growing the next generation of leaders in that role, and I'm really pleased to see my service secretary support that agenda.
Are you able to share a copy of that department document?
We'd love to get that to you.
If you would, we'd appreciate it. Doctor, do you want to add anything to that just before I close out? What is the department doing with respect to what we're told is a shortage of qualified people in the pipeline to do program management and to do scheduling on projects of this nature?
Finding good people is always difficult. Colonel Dave Madden, who I have the highest respect for, who runs the GPS program office out in Los Angeles, is one of the better program managers I believe that I've met, but he has one of the most difficult jobs in the U.S. government. You manage a very large enterprise, it's a very complex system, and it's difficult to find good people. We have been trying. I'm not an expert on the personnel systems in the Department of Defense. I'd be happy to find you an expert to bring here or get you any
I think we may do that. I think we may have a hearing with people in there. If this is a problem, as it appears to be, and we've had people come to us of late, I should tell you, and explain to us that no matter what we're talking about in a contract, and Government Accountability Office, I think in almost all the programs on their general report of overruns and schedule problems indicated that that was a real serious issue on that. So I think we will want to have a separate hearing on that. Thank you. Mr. Flake.
I don't have any particular questions at this point. I just want to echo what's been said here. It seems that, yeah, we're hearing some, as the chairman put it, happy talk, and there are ways to explain why these overruns have occurred, both in cost and time. But we want to make sure that the lessons are learned, and that in the future we're not here, as Mr. Duncan said, a year from now, hearing the same thing. just more expensive and more timely at that time. So thank you.
Gentleman yield for 1 second?
Yes.
Yeah, one other question on that, too, is continuity of program managers. I remember that was mentioned in the GAO report as well. So what are we doing about the fact of people just continually, there was a particular number of people that went through that program, 7 different program managers, each of whom, most 5 of whom served for only 1 year each. And that can't be healthy for a program this sophisticated and complex. So what are we doing about that?
Well, sir, I believe that particular reference was looking at the program management inside industry. So it's an expectation that we hold to our suppliers that they also field a stable leadership team.
Well, this is the 2F program, had 7 different program managers, the first 5 of whom served 1 year each. That's not your colleagues, that's you.
Okay. Well, again, the early days of the 2F program were in the 90s. Today, it's our policy to keep the wing commanders in place, the program managers, Colonel Madden, in place a minimum of 3 years. We recognize through the whole acquisition leadership chain that the continuity of acquisition leadership is one of the keys.
And are you having success holding it for
Yes,
3
sir.
years? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Foster.
Do you have an integrated project schedule in place?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And
Program office.
could you provide us with a list of the high-level milestones that we can anticipate in the next 1 or 2 years?
Yes,
so
sir.
that we can, when you come back a year from now, we can track you against those?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in terms of the system degradation, do you actually have a good, either a modeling or a lot of field experience to really understand this? What's going to happen as the satellites stop?
Right. I feel that the Air Force has really the gold standard that's been developed by our federally funded Research and Development Center, the Aerospace Corporation. This has been their corporate focus since they were founded in the early 60s. So they have pioneered and keep the technical research on satellite failure modes and effects, actuarial forecasts, device physics, phenomena in the space environment, the science basis for making these kind of runs. So yes, sir, I think it's the best in the world.
You think it's a well-understood degradation process?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Very much so.
That's yield back.
Mr. Flake.
Let me just finish up for a second. Dr. Heibrecht, as far as streamlining the procurement process, we know that's been a problem in the past, but is that being taken care of? And one other question, I just want to make sure that Congress isn't part of the problem here. Are there congressionally directed projects or contracts that you have to deal with that slow the process or complicate the process, given your mandate to make sure that these contracts are open to competitive processes?
I'm not from the procurement process side of the department. That would be our acquisition technology and logistics. We have a new undersecretary there. He has some strong ideas, I believe, on how we're going to change the procurement process to make it more effective. I wouldn't presume to speak for him and the kinds of changes that he wants to make. But again, I could take that for the record or bring in somebody from his office to discuss it.
Let me just ask Mr. General McCaslin, that second question. Is Congress playing the proper role here? Are we giving you the flexibility and with which you need to carry this out, or are we complicating the process by directing you perhaps with congressionally directed earmarks or projects that make it more difficult to do your job?
Well, sir, focusing on the GPS program, my sense and interaction with the Congress over the past decade has been one of a very healthy interaction with the Defense Oversight Committees and a supportive role, both in terms of critically examining our plans and in providing the funding that we need to execute the program. But with that entree, I'd point out that the GPS-3 program is going to enter into a little more complicated nuance. There's a presidential directive that assigns the responsibility for budgeting new civil capabilities to the Department of Transportation. And so the synchronization of their budget requests in the Congress with the defense budget request, the preponderance of the money will be defense, but we've chosen as a matter of national strategy to program budget and request appropriations from the civil funding line to add to the military funding line for this national capability. That's going to be new territory for us, and I respectfully suggest that that would be worthy of careful attention.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Chaplin, this is apparently a cost-plus contract. Is there a better way to do it?
I believe the better way to do it is to focus on not making the mistakes in the past. Fixed price for this type of program would be difficult because you're trying to advance technologies and there's a lot of unknowns. When we've tried fixed price arrangements before for space programs, it was done at the time that we were also trying to implement these other kinds of acquisition reforms, and it was very poorly implemented, and it resulted in almost disastrous consequences. So under the contract scenario that they're in, I would just say they need to exert good oversight over the contractors. They need to make sure the program stays stable. They need to make sure requirements don't change. They need to really look at contractor performance and base the award fees on how the contractors performed. I think a lot of things have been done on the 3A program to position the program for success, and I'm hopeful that will be more successful than other space programs in the past.
Thank you. Gentlemen, do you write into your contract some protection against industry mergers interrupting the course of things?
Sir, we don't explicitly require them to make commitments like that about what they'll do within their companies. We make a business agreement with them to deliver goods, services, and supplies for a period of time.
But then when they don't do it because they're merging or whatever, you just pay them more money. What can we, I mean, it's a contract. It would seem to me that you can
Yes.
put things in to protect yourself.
Yes, we do.
You don't necessarily say that you're going to restrict them from merging and consolidating, but you can say that you have some say over whether or not it's going to happen, if it's going to impact adversely the progress on your program.
Yes, sir. And the tools to protect the taxpayers' interests there range from our incentive fee plan, which has an opportunity to earn money if they deliver, and penalties if they don't. We ultimately, even on a cost reimbursement contract, reserve the prerogative to decide whether charges are allowable. And lastly, with respect to the contract type, I'd point out that the GPS 3A program at this stage is in its development cycle, which is appropriate to use a cost reimbursement contract, but we reserve the prerogative to negotiate a different contract class for production articles. For example, the GPS 2F program today has a mix of a cost reimbursement effort for the first satellites to get that production line stable, and then fixed price buys for the last 8, I believe.
Okay. Will you have your office prepare for us an accounting then of the delays that were caused by, and one of the reasons you cite for this overrun of costs and the delay was the mergers and the consolidations. So provide for us an accounting of how many bonuses or fees were not paid when that caused a slowdown and an overrun, and what other exercises were taken under the contract to protect the taxpayers' rights. Because I think we have a right to know that they weren't getting bonuses and fees and other things for taking self-interested consolidations and mergers and slowing down the project and running us over costs, and at the same time getting rewarded for it. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I certainly recall even recently very low to zero award fees being paid to the 2F contractor as we were struggling to turn that program around under
I just appreciate you putting that in so we formally see that, if you would.
You bet,
now,
sir.
We've got a whole host of problems here, generally with procurement, not just with the GPS program on that. So I wanted your assurance that you're either dealing with them or going to deal with them. One is starting programs too early, before the design is where it ought to be or whatever. Are you dealing with that?
Yes, sir. And I think the GAO noted in this report that we had put extensive pre-competition risk reduction activities into the program. I think it's evidence of success that we have we had a functioning engineering brass board of the entire GPS 3A payload available before we made contract award. It was part of the pre-competitive risk reduction activities. We passed a serious and thorough scrub by the OSD Director of Research and Engineering, who attested to the technological readiness, part of OSD's internal due diligence. So I'm confident that we started this program on a good foot.
Okay. Now, do you cite any contract and program managing weaknesses? Do you think you have any that exist right now, or have you filled all those gaps?
Sir, I think at this stage of the program, the program management strategy is as well tuned as we know how to do it.
All right, so you have no problems with technical expertise. You have all that you need at your fingertips.
We're adequately resourced for executing the program today, sir.
All right, you see no capability gaps in the industrial base?
Well, the space industrial base is of course the people who will actually build this. Right. I believe the prime industry base is healthy and strong. We all have some concern about the secondary suppliers, the vendors, the people who field independent subassemblies like gyroscopes and star sensors and space qualified components. That's an industry that's under some stress, and we monitor it very carefully. In fact, we have an interagency working group spanning all of national security space, focused on the health of the space industrial base. We exchange information. We provide a forum for those vendors to bring correlated problems that they're seeing across the industry to our attention. And the DDR&E in OSD has a certain amount of funding available for support of the industry base. In my mind, when I look at industry, that's the level that has the risk that concerns me the most, sir.
Okay, but you're doing all that you can do about it right now?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
What are we doing about protecting against new requirements being added as the project is going on and that having an impact on that? Are we shutting it off, just deciding that we're going to have a particular product, that's going to be it for this program, new things come on the next end, right, or what are you doing?
Yes, sir, that's a very important point because as the GAO noted, part of what made what contributed to the cost growth on the 2F program was the folding in of new requirements. We've chosen to structure the GPS 3 program in a way to pre-plan those insertions. And what I mean by that is that we have a capability list for the final product version of GPS 3 that includes a number of low-risk features and includes some high-risk features. We chose to take on the most important and lower-risk features first in 3A and to size the spacecraft, its power, its chassis size, the launch size, to provide the room to grow for the higher risk features. We will make separate decisions as the requirements for those higher risk functions, further power growth, additional signals, additional security features, and we'll conduct a detailed assessment of alternatives and risk assessment and decide what package of those are ready for including in a distinct second block or potentially a third block. Now, this isn't a win all around. Our military users had to reconcile that they would be patient enough to wait longer than they might have. The assurance we gave them is that we had a higher confidence of delivering what we had committed to in exchange for that. And that appears to be a bargain that is holding water. And we welcome your support of that too, sir.
Well, it would seem to me at some point somebody, the doctor or you or somebody, has the authority to say, you know what, enough. You know, we planned this particular program to do those things. We thought it was what we wanted. If something's going to be added on that's going to bring this way over cost or way behind schedule, they'll have to wait for the next bus. And who has that authority? Is it you, Doctor?
That authority rests with the Joint Staff requirements process. I would say when I mentioned earlier that 4 or 5 years ago when we recognized that we potentially had a constellation sustainment issue, the Air Force came forward with a plan. Originally there was no 3A, B, C, there was just a 3, and we were going to build the whole thing right up front. And they came up with a plan where the 3A is really just a low-risk satellite to make sure that we have something to keep the constellation going. And then we have plans to insert the various capabilities into the later blocks.
Okay. And then lastly, I look at the Government Accountability Office, and I see they have identified 9 practices associated with effective scheduling estimating. Of those 9, 1 was met in this 3A schedule, 1 was not met, and 7 were partially met. Are you focused on that, and are you going to bring that up to all best practices?
Sir, I'd like to take that for the record because as little time as I've had to review this report, I wasn't able to actually itemize what those practices were, but I'd be pleased to go and answer that for the record if
We
you
appreciate
would allow
that.
me, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Flake, anything else? No. I want to thank all of you for your testimony. This is helpful to us, and I think helpful to our next panel to give them an idea of what's going on, and we'll be anxious to hear their remarks as well. And I would appreciate it if you have an opportunity to submit those things that you promised for the record at your earliest convenience. So thank you all very much. Thanks. And now we'll take a little pause as we set the second panel up and maybe come back in 5 minutes. Thank you.